The following is a work of Gothic vampire fiction. All characters, events, and situations depicted are fictional. This story contains dark themes, suspenseful imagery, and supernatural scenes that may be unsettling to some viewers, especially children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Their names I have buried beneath centuries. Kings, bishops, murderers, saints. Men who believed themselves chosen by God, and monsters who no longer bothered with the disguise. I have watched empires collapse into dust. I have watched holy men bless slaughter. I have watched the night feed, and feed carefully, as all wise predators must. And in all my long and ruined existence, I have feared very little, until her. You may imagine, if you like, that I speak of beauty. She possessed it. God help any room that held her. You may imagine I speak of cunning. She possessed that too, in measures enough to shame princes, thieves, and executioners alike. But beauty does not unmake the ancient, and cunning alone does not trouble creatures such as I. No, the thing I bit was far worse. Primal, inevitable, a terrible weight of power, born without prophecy, without mercy, without even a trace of empathy. I have turned many, too many. Some begged for life, some begged for power, some begged only not to die. She begged for nothing. Remember that. For I did not raise some weeping innocent from the grave and call it mercy. I did not lure a lonely girl into darkness with pretty words and a beautiful face. I took the most dangerous human I had ever known, and I gave her the night, against the night's will. Even now there are those older than I am who do not speak her name above a whisper. Not because she hunts the old blood, not because she is crueler than the rest of us, but because on the night I turned her, something in this earth opened. I felt it. As though a seam, long hidden beneath creation, had at last been split by the one hand cruel enough, strong enough, destined enough to find it. It was not surprise I felt when her blood changed. It was recognition, as if the grave, the dark, the old hunger beneath all things had been waiting for her longer than it had ever waited for me. And if there is guilt in what I confess to you now, it is not the guilt of a man who made a mistake. It is the guilt of one who understood, even then, that some doors are meant to remain closed, and opened one anyway. Her name, when first I knew her, was not Seraphine. No, that name came later. When first I met her, she was called Lysandra, and she was standing outside a church with murder in her eyes. The church stood at the edge of the sleeping quarter, like a stone lie. Its bell tower cut the night into hard black shapes against a starless sky, and moonlight washed its walls in a pallor not unlike my own. The men inside would have called it holy ground. I had lived long enough to know that stone could be consecrated by prayer and still stink of greed, cowardice, and blood. There had been rain earlier that evening. The earth was dark and soft beneath the hedges, and the narrow lane running past the chapel wall shone in places where water clung to ruts carved by wheels and boots. A crooked wooden fence bordered the far side of the road, half rotted from seasons of neglect. Beyond it, olive trees swayed in the faint wind like old women whispering into their shawls. It was there, in the seam between churchlight and shadow, that I saw her. Not stumbling, not searching, waiting. There is a stillness to chosen violence that differs from all other kinds. Panic trembles, grief leaks, rage breathes too hard. But intent, true intent, grows quiet. It becomes economy. The body ceases to fidget. The eyes spend nothing they do not mean to use. She stood with that stillness. One gloved hand rested lightly at her side. The other disappeared into the folds of her dark cloak, near enough to the hidden shape at her waist that I knew at once she had not come there to pray. Her head was slightly bowed, though not in reverence. She was listening, watching the church doors. I remained beneath the yew trees across the lane, unseen, and studied her. At first I thought only this: she is beautiful. Then the thought soured and deepened. No, not beautiful. Dangerous. She wore no jewels, no silks, no little display of rank meant to flatter the eye or soften the face. Her clothing was practical and dark, the sort chosen by a woman who knew how to go unseen when being seen carried a cost. But no simplicity could hide what she was, not from me. Her face was pale bronze in the moonlight, severe and composed, its beauty sharpened by hardship rather than protected from it. Her dark hair was pinned back loosely, not with vanity, but convenience, though a few heavy strands had escaped and stirred at her cheek in the wind. Her eyes were fixed on the chapel doors with such total, unblinking concentration that for one absurd moment, I wondered if she might break them open by sight alone. I had seen hunters stand like that. I had seen executioners stand like that. I had stood like that myself, many centuries before men began painting their cruelty as civilization. And so I watched her a little longer. The chapel doors opened. A spill of candlelight stretched across the wet stone steps. A priest emerged first, cloaked and muttering to the man behind him. That second man drew my attention at once, not because he was powerful, but because he wore the smug carelessness of one accustomed to being protected by powerful things. He was not old, not young either. Wealth had softened him in the places conscience should have hardened. His beard was clipped neatly. His boots were clean despite the weather. One ring flashed on his hand as he gestured too broadly at something the priest had said, and even from where I stood, I could smell wine on him. Lysandra did not move. That interested me. The careless kill is the one lunged at too early. But she waited, letting the priest descend the steps first, letting the servant with the lantern follow, letting the rich man come last, alone enough to separate himself from protection, though not yet far enough to escape witness. Then she moved. It was almost disappointing how good she was. Almost. She crossed the lane not with theatrical stealth but with practiced intelligence, taking the path of deepest shadow, never hurrying, never wasting the gift of darkness by flinching from it. In another life, in another arrangement of the world, she might have slit his throat and been gone before the priest thought to turn his head. But that was not the arrangement the knight had chosen. I stepped out before she reached him. "Do not," I said. She stopped at once. That alone told me more than surprise ever could. Most mortals gasp when death speaks near their ear. Most whirl badly. Most demand to know who stands behind them as if the answer might save them. Lysandra did none of these things. She turned her head only halfway, enough for one dark eye to find me across the space between us. The rich man continued down the lane, ignorant for 3 more steps. Then, at last, some instinct in him detected what his mind had not. He glanced back, saw the 2 of us in the dark, and quickened. Lysandra let him go, not because she had abandoned the kill, because I had become the more urgent question. She faced me fully then, and for the first time I saw her expression unobstructed. No fear, none. Not hidden fear, not mastered fear, not the tight little tremor mortals confuse for courage. Nothing. Only annoyance. It pleased me more than it should have. "You are in my path," she said. Her voice was low, controlled, and without perfume. The voice of a woman who wasted nothing, not even sound. "I am preserving your evening," I replied. She looked past me toward the retreating form of the man on the lane. "You are preserving his." "Barely. Your plan would have failed within 30 paces. At that, one of her brows lifted very slightly, a smaller expression than most women would grant a passing inconvenience, yet from her it felt almost intimate. "Would it?" "Yes." She took one measured step toward me. "And you know this because?" "Because the priest would have heard him fall. The servant with the lantern would have seen the blood. The mud at the roadside is too soft to run cleanly. Your left boot is already marked from the ditch, and the blade hidden under your cloak is sharp enough to cut a man, but not heavy enough to silence him before panic. You would have had half the quarter on your heels before the church bell finished its second cry." Silence. The wind moved between us. Farther off, a dog barked and then thought better of it. Lysandra's gaze dropped once, very briefly, to my mouth, then rose again to my eyes. "You see too much," she said. "I have had practice. And yet you have interrupted me." I inclined my head a fraction, also a habit. She studied me then with a stillness that would have unnerved wiser men. The lane behind her had emptied. The chapel doors had shut again. The rich man was gone. Her revenge had slipped into the dark, and still she did not look away from me. Interesting, I thought. Very interesting. "You knew what I meant to do," she said. "Yes. You let me come close enough to nearly do it. Yes. Why? I smiled, though only with my mouth. Curiosity. At that, something changed in her face. Not softness, never that, but a sharpening, as though some inner blade she kept folded had just been drawn a little farther free. No, she said quietly. Not curiosity. Before I could answer, she moved, fast. Not with the supernatural speed of my kind, but with the terrifying efficiency of a human being who had long ago learned that hesitation was merely a prettier form of death. She pivoted, drove one hard boot into the rotting fence post beside the lane, and splintered the weakened wood at its base with a violent crack. The post fell crooked. She seized the jagged length before it struck the ground. By the time the stake's sharpened end met my chest, her other hand had already braced the wood with perfect control. No wild thrust, no shaking grip, no desperate bluff. Precision. The tip pressed directly over my heart. And there she stood, inches from me, breathing evenly, one hand wrapped around a splintered length of wood that could have ended me if delivered by surprise or luck, staring into my face as though she had finally reached the part of the conversation that interested her. I did not move. It was not caution that held me still. It was astonishment. For more than 1,000 years, nothing in me had stirred that did not belong to hunger, memory, or the old mechanical cruelty of survival. Yet there in the wet road, beside a church I despised, with a mortal woman holding broken timber against my dead heart, I felt it. Not life. Something crueler. Warmth. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she had seen the flicker of it pass through me. There, at last, was the truth. She had not come into this moment blind. This was no simple interruption of revenge, no chance collision between predator and prey. Beneath the calm of her face, behind the cold arithmetic of her gaze, I sensed the architecture of another design. Not fully, not then, but enough. Enough to know she was not merely adapting to danger. She had expected some version of it. You knew, I said softly. Her mouth almost curved, not quite a smile. Smiles were too generous for what lived in her. I suspected, she said, that I existed, that something did. The stake did not waver. I lowered my eyes to the broken wood between us, then returned them to her face. And you thought this would be wise? No, she said. I thought it would be useful. That answer should have amused me. Perhaps on another night it would have. But something in the air had changed. The lane felt smaller, the darkness more attentive. Even the wind seemed to have withdrawn to listen. And what am I to you? I asked. Useful for what? Her gaze went through me then. Not at me, through me, like a knife seeking the hinge in a lock. For the answer, she said. I could have taken the stake from her hand before she finished the word. I could have snapped her wrist, broken her throat, left her cooling in the mud beside the very chapel she had chosen as her hunting ground. Any other vampire of my acquaintance would have done exactly that, if only to preserve pride. But pride had already begun abandoning me, because the question beneath her words was no longer, "What are you?" It was, "Will you do?" "You speak as though you came here for me," I said. Her eyes flashed then, dark and terrible. "I came here for both of you." That was the moment I understood two things at once. First, the dead man walking down the lane had indeed been marked for death, and not without cause. Second, I had not interrupted the night. I had stepped into a trap. Lysandra slept, not like prey, like a cold, calculated huntress, as a hunter who had chosen for a few guarded hours to let unconsciousness approach under terms she might still revoke. And yet, on that night, there was something else in her stillness. Not vulnerability, calculation at rest. The room bore traces of her everywhere. No wasted ornament, no sentimental clutter. A comb of carved wood, a basin, a chair placed with purpose rather than vanity, a small table with a candle burned low and cold beside a book left closed, not abandoned, but paused. The bed itself was neatly made, except for the shape of her lying within it. One arm above the coverlet, the other hidden, no doubt near steel. The nightgown she wore was simple only to an ignorant eye. Soft white linen, close at the bodice, falling in pale lines that followed her form where they ought not have. Modest enough to be defended, dangerous enough to be remembered. Moonlight found its way across her throat, the line of her collarbone, the quiet rise and fall of her chest. Her dark hair spilled across the pillow and shoulder in restless strands, as though even sleep had not convinced it to obedience. She was a vision. And for a brief, contemptible instant, I understood why weaker men called beauty a weapon. Then I remembered I had brought one of my own. With the slightest turn of thought, I commanded the curtains to part. Moonlight poured into the chamber like cold water, and with it came the blue haze. Lysandra's eyes opened at once. No gasp, no startled cry, only the swift return of consciousness sharpened instantly into awareness. Her body did not jerk from the bed. It gathered itself. Good, I thought. Let her see. The glow intensified outside the window until the form within it resolved. A young woman hovered there, suspended several feet above the ground beyond the French doors, as though hung by a noose the night alone could see. She wore a white nightdress, now wrinkled and faintly stained. Her skin was pale, with the waxen pallor of blood loss. Her head had fallen to one side, baring the throat in obscene display, where two dark punctures marked the place my teeth had entered her. Her eyes were open. That was the cruelest part. Wide with panic, wet with the last trapped remnants of a plea she no longer possessed the strength to voice. Her lips hung parted as if speech had been abandoned somewhere between the body and the soul. She rose and fell in the blue haze with dreadful, languid slowness, her limbs limp, her posture broken into the awful elegance of a hanged saint. She was very near death, and entirely in my control. I had expected revulsion, fear, perhaps even anger. Most mortals, however hardened, break themselves against the first true sight of what we are. They recoil from it because they still labor under the pathetic hope that evil ought at least to dress itself honestly. Lysandra did none of these things. I heard her heart quicken. A mortal would have. Any mortal would have. Whatever ice lived in her spirit, she was still flesh enough to feel horror. But when she sat up, she did so with the calm of a woman rising to answer an appointment. She drew back the coverlet and placed her bare feet upon the floor. Then she stood. The moon found her in full. The nightgown clung where it should not have, trailing in soft folds along the shape of a body neither ornamental nor fragile, but wholly, terribly feminine. Not the studied softness of court women or the painted imitation of brothel girls. Hers was the beauty of control, restraint, and blood-warm intention. Each movement was unhurried, measured, as though she understood perfectly well that she was being watched, and had decided, with astonishing ease, to make that fact serve her. I tell you now with no pleasure that I, who had worn beauty like a blade for centuries, knew at once what she was doing. She had changed the field. She crossed the room toward the window without once searching the darkness for me. She did not need to. By then, she understood enough. The girl outside was not the attack. She was the message. When Lysandra reached the French doors, she opened them herself. The blue-lit victim drifted just beyond the threshold, limp and swaying in my hold. Still, Lysandra showed no fear. She stepped close enough that the pale haze touched her face and lifted the darker strands of her hair. Then, with exquisite calm, she raised one hand and touched the floating girl's cheek with the back of her fingers. It was not inspection. It was pity. No, not pity. Something worse. Respect. I felt, for the first time in many years, the edge of uncertainty. Lysandra's hand slid from the girl's face to the front of her nightgown. With one controlled pull, she drew the half-dead body across the threshold and into the chamber. The compulsion I held over the girl did not break, but something in the act itself sent a chill through me more profound than any prayer ever had. Lysandra moved her carefully, as though handling not a prop of terror, but a person. She straightened the poor creature's head, closed her mouth with gentle fingers, smoothed the disordered line of her throat. Then she bent and kissed her, softly, on the lips. No lust in it, no madness, no mockery. Only a terrible, unshakable tenderness offered in defiance of what I had intended. I have fed in plague houses. I have watched villages burn. I have heard children call for mothers already cooling in the dark. And still I tell you, few things have ever unsettled me more than that kiss. Because in the space of a breath, Lysandra had answered all my cruelty with something I did not possess and did not understand. She laid the girl gently upon her bed. The victim remained frozen under my influence, but safe. Safer, at least, than she had been in my hands. Lysandra stood over her for a moment, adjusting the blanket with the cool efficiency of a woman tending the wounded after battle. Then she turned and walked back to the open window. Her gaze lifted into the dark where I remained concealed. She could not see me, not truly. And yet I had the distinct and unwelcome sensation of being found. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. "You may enter, savage." I do not know which struck me harder, that she had called me correctly, or that she had invited me in as though I were the one awaiting judgment.